The knock was softer than the wind. Elias Kane opened the door to see 10 figures wrapped in rags and silence. Snow clung to their lashes, blood crusted one boy's lip. A woman held a bundle that didn't cry. All 10 were Apache, all 10 barefoot. The prairie behind them stretched empty, white as bone and cruel as ever. Kane didn't speak, neither did they. He stared, hand on the rifle mounted just above the doorframe. It had been years since he'd spoken to a living soul. More years since he'd seen an Apache this close, let alone 10. His mind reeled back to the screams, the raids, the smell of burning hides, and the taste of his own blood. The woman raised her eyes, not pleading, not angry, just tired. So tired it drained the hatred from his chest like a bucket left in sun. The fire behind him cracked. Inside there was warmth, a loaf of cornbread, a cot. 10 heartbeats thudded against the cold silence between them. And still not a word was spoken. Elias stepped back, held the door open wide, and let the past step inside. Elias Kane hadn't always lived like a ghost. Once he'd been a father with a roof and a woman who sang to the chickens at dawn. Their boy Levi came screaming into the world during a flood that washed out the southern ridge, born in mud and thunder, and held up to the lightning like an offering. He had bright eyes and a laugh that echoed off barn walls, a laugh Elias once said could scare wolves away. But wolves weren't what took him. Fever came in the second spring, so quiet at first they thought it was just the chill of a wet night. His wife boiled willow bark and pressed cool cloths to his forehead. Elias held him close and whispered the story of the coyote and the hawk. But nothing worked. On the 3rd day, the child's eyes stopped following light. On the 4th, he stopped breathing altogether. Elias didn't scream, didn't pray. He just walked to the edge of their property where a salt cedar grew twisted by wind and dug a hole so deep the soil bled cold. He laid Levi in, wrapped in his wife's old quilt. Then he sat there until morning broke through the clouds. She didn't cry until she saw him still covered in dirt, arms limp, eyes blank. A week later, she went to her sister's in Texas and never came back. The cabin grew still. The fields overgrew. The chickens stopped laying. Elias tried for a time to plant again, to fix what could be mended, but every board he nailed only echoed louder in that empty space where Levi had once run barefoot, chasing grasshoppers and shouting at the wind. When winter came, he boarded up the windows and didn't open them again for 5 years. Food came from traps, and he cooked only enough to survive. His voice faded with the seasons. He no longer recognized the man in the cracked mirror above the basin. Once he wandered too far and collapsed near a dry riverbed. Buzzards circled until the cold woke him. He didn't care. Nothing in him wanted to keep going, but something deeper, a memory maybe, dragged his body back to the hearth. That's when he started carving. Wood mostly. Faces, hands, sometimes the bent spine of an old man leaning on a cane. He made a small figure that looked like Levi and placed it on the mantel. He didn't look at it often, but he never moved it either. One summer he heard shots down near Widow's Pass. Soldiers had cornered a raiding party. The screams echoed even at his ranch. The next morning, blood ran in the creek. Elias didn't go near it. He told himself he was done with men, their wars, and their vengeance. The land didn't care. The wind still whispered like a tired preacher, and the stars came whether a man grieved or not. But that winter the rabbits thinned out. Snow came early. And on the 3rd day of silence, 10 barefoot Apaches came knocking at his door, not with guns or fire, but with frostbitten feet, and the last look his son had given him before he closed his eyes forever. Elias didn't sleep that night. The fire kept low, fed slow, as if heat itself needed rationing. The 10 Apaches huddled along the cabin walls, each one wrapped in the kind of silence that makes a man question if he's dreaming. The woman with the bundle, she sat nearest the stove, unmoving. Elias hadn't asked what was inside. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. By morning the snow let up, but the clouds stayed like a lid over the world. Elias boiled beans and left them on the table. None made a move. Finally, the eldest gray at the temple scar carved down one cheek stood and ladled food into a wooden bowl. The others followed, slow, almost cautious. No words. No thanks. Just hunger and the small mercy of a warm place. Elias watched from his chair. The rifle still hung over the mantel untouched. But he kept glancing at it, not out of fear, but memory. Every face in that cabin was etched in pain. Not one pair of eyes dared to hope. But it wasn't hate he saw. It was loss, the same weight he carried like a stone in his gut. On the second day, one of the younger men collapsed while chopping firewood without being asked. Elias ran to him, caught him before he hit the snow. Fever. The same red sheen he remembered on Levi's cheeks. It pulled something deep and violent from his chest. Panic. Grief. Helplessness. He dragged the boy inside, stripped off his wet shirt, and covered him with every quilt he had left. That night he boiled willow bark again, just like his wife once did. He remembered the scent, the way it made the air bittersweet. The boy didn't open his eyes for 2 days. Elias never left his side. The others noticed. One brought more firewood. Another swept the snow from the front path. The woman with the bundle began setting out tin cups, unspoken chores forming like frost on the windows. Still no names, no stories. But something shifted. A rhythm, a pulse. Then came the riders. On the 5th day, as dawn stretched gold across the drifts, Elias heard hoofbeats, distant but heavy. Soldiers, 6 of them, blue coats, long rifles. Leading them was Captain Jarrett Dunn, a man Elias had fought beside during the Apache campaigns down south. A man who'd once joked about skinning Comanche for boots. Elias stepped outside, the cold biting through his shirt like a blade. Dunn raised a hand, dismounted, and walked forward, glancing at the cabin. "You harboring them, Kane?" he asked, voice like rust. "Saw smoke. Saw tracks." Elias didn't answer. "They killed 2 settlers near Dry Creek, slit throats, took supplies. One was a girl." Dunn's eyes narrowed. "You know what they do?" Elias stared. Something twisted in his gut. He looked back toward the cabin. The woman was watching through a crack in the window. The boy with the fever still slept by the stove. "You got 10 in there?" Dunn asked. "Let us look. If they're innocent, they'll come with us. If not, well, you don't want to be caught aiding." Elias said nothing. His hands were fists. "What's it gonna be, Kane?" He saw the line, knew what stepping over it meant. He could let the soldiers in. On the safe side of law and country, he could betray those 10 strangers and never have to feel their ghosts whisper at night. Or he could lie, shelter them. Risk everything for people who might slit his throat in his sleep or had already slit someone else's. But Elias remembered Levi. Not just the death, but the last look, the trust, the flicker of hope even as breath left his lungs. That same look was in the boy by the stove. And Elias knew if he turned these people away, he'd bury that look forever. "No one here but me," he said. Dunn frowned. "You sure?" Elias nodded once. Dunn stared long, then spat into the snow. "You always were a strange bastard," he said, turning to mount. "You want to rot with them, your choice." As the horses thundered off, Elias stood alone in the snow, breath steaming, body trembling not from cold but consequence. Behind him the cabin waited, warm, dangerous, full of ghosts and maybe something more, something worth saving or dying for. By the time the soldiers disappeared behind the ridge, Elias Kane knew the ground beneath his life had shifted. The snow that fell that night didn't hush the world, it buried it. The cabin became a tomb of heat and tension, every breath inside thick with unspoken truth. The boy with the fever lived. When he opened his eyes, Elias expected rage or confusion. Instead, he saw calm, the kind that grows in people who've lived too long with death. The boy didn't speak, just nodded. That was enough. The woman with the bundle finally unwrapped it on the 7th day. Inside wasn't a baby as Elias had feared, but a doll, handmade eyes drawn with coal, wearing a necklace of turkey bones and thread. Levi once had something like it. The woman laid it on the table, then used a flint to light the fire anew. Elias saw her hands tremble as she struck. Not from weakness, from memory. The rhythm they'd built began to hum louder. Each of the 10 had purpose. One cleaned the tools. Another fashioned snowshoes from scrap leather. The youngest, a girl of maybe 9, fed the chickens Elias thought had long since wandered off. Her quiet voice hummed tunes he almost remembered. But outside, things grew darker. The soldiers came back not to the ranch, but near enough. Elias heard them on the trail laughing, barking orders. Then came smoke over the northern trees. Someone's home burned. Elias smelled the pitch, the pork-like scent of charred flesh. Dunn was hunting now. Not questioning. Hunting. The town grew restless. Word spread of the crazy old Kane hiding redskins in his walls. A man named Russell, who once borrowed Elias's plow blade, rode by one morning with a shotgun laid across his lap. Didn't stop. Didn't wave. Just stared. Elias knew then it wasn't just the army anymore. It was everyone. The land didn't take sides, but people did. And this time Elias was on the wrong one. The Apaches knew it too. One night the eldest Scarface stood by the fire and pressed his palm flat to his chest. Then he pointed at Elias. No words, just the motion. Then he pressed that same hand to the ground, then to the doll, and then to the rifle above the mantel. Elias understood. We are one now. Bound. By dirt, by loss, by blood yet to be spilled. They began preparing. Quietly, efficiently. The woman took inventory of the food. 2 others gathered pine resin and ashes to make firebombs. The fever boy began sharpening sticks into spears. Elias watched, unsure whether to stop them or help. Then he started melting bullets. The tin pan hissed, the fire cracked, the air grew tighter. On the 11th night, a knock came again. Not gentle, not slow. 4 heavy slams, then silence. Elias opened the door to find a letter nailed to the post. Leave them by dawn, or hang beside them. D, no signature, no seals, just that jagged D done. The threat was official now, but not lawful. This was something darker, vengeance clothed in duty. Elias burned the letter. The Apaches didn't ask what it said. They'd read the fire in his eyes. That same night, the girl with the chickens slipped out and didn't come back. Panic swept the cabin like a dust storm. Scarface and 2 others tracked her footprints to the barn, then to the tree line. She was gone. Vanished like mist. Some said it was a trap. Others whispered she went to warn someone. Elias couldn't believe that. Wouldn't. He remembered how she sang to the hens. No traitor ever sang like that. The next morning, the doll was gone too. Tension thickened. Scarface made marks on the floor symbols Elias didn't know. The woman prayed over the fire. The boy sharpened more sticks. Elias packed the rifle, cleaned it for the first time in 5 years. By the 13th night, all of them slept in shifts. Elias stayed near the door, heart beating like a drum. He thought of Levi, of the fever, of the days after his wife left and the cabin felt like a coffin. He looked around now and saw people, faces, a pulse of something he hadn't known in years. Hope. Then came the sound of drums, not Apache drums, military off rhythm. Heavy. Echoing through the cold like a curse. The soldiers had returned. And they weren't coming to talk. The drums stopped just after midnight. Elias stood at the window, breath clouding the glass. Snow had fallen again, masking all tracks, muffling every step. But he felt them out there. He always could. Men with rifles and torches, men who wanted blood. Inside, the fire burned low. The Apaches waited in stillness, bodies tense, eyes locked to the door. Scarface sat cross-legged, whispering in a tongue Elias didn't understand but felt. He recognized the rhythm. Goodbye. The boy who had nearly died now clutched a sharpened branch, hands trembling. The woman placed the doll's necklace around her neck. The doll itself had never returned. Then without sound, the youngest of them, no more than 17, rose and stepped forward. His face was half shadowed, but his voice was clear. They won't wait till dawn, he said, in perfect English. Elias blinked. The young Apache turned to the group. They didn't react, as if they knew. How long, Elias asked, voice hoarse. The boy met his eyes. Long enough. He walked to the fire, knelt, and lifted a charred log. Beneath it, wrapped in hide, was a map. Elias moved closer. It wasn't a battlefield map. It was a blueprint. His ranch. Every wall, every exit, the barn, the trapdoor under the floorboards. even the shelf where he kept the rifle oil. "You drew this?" Elias asked. The boy nodded. "Years ago?" "Why, my father told me." Elias felt his knees weaken. "Who's your father?" The boy stood. Cold eyes. "No tremble now. You buried him under the salt cedar," he said. Elias froze. "No," he whispered. "My mother was Comanche," the boy continued. "My father was white, died in a raid. You found him, buried him. My mother saw you. She was too weak to come near, but she watched from the trees. She said you prayed. She said you cried. I buried—" "A child," Elias said, voice breaking. Yes, the boy nodded. "But he wasn't yours." The floor felt like it had vanished. The walls spun. "You're telling me—" Elias gripped the table to steady himself. "Levi lived." The boy didn't answer. Just looked at him silent. And then Elias saw it. The jawline. The eyes. Not just the shape, but the way they narrowed in thought. The way they drifted just slightly when holding back pain. Levi had done that. "Where is he?" Elias asked. The boy stepped back. "With the others?" What others? But the boy turned to the Apaches. Spoke in their tongue. They responded with solemn nods. Elias looked around the room and saw it differently now. Not refugees, not strangers, scouts. And the woman, she looked away, her shoulders heavy with guilt. She had known. "You came here on purpose," Elias said. "You knew who I was." "No," the boy said. "They did. I just followed the story." "What story?" The boy stared into the fire. "The man who buried the wrong son. The man who gave shelter to his enemy. The man who couldn't tell a Comanche child from his own." Outside, a horse neighed. Elias stepped toward the rifle. "Are you here to kill me?" "No," the boy said. "We came to see what kind of man you became. The kind that forgets or the kind that learns." Elias's hands trembled. "And you fed us. You lied for us. You saved one of us. You mourned someone you didn't even know." Elias gritted his teeth. "That doesn't answer my question." The boy turned toward the door. "They're coming now. To finish what was started. Who? The soldiers, the townsfolk. But not just them." He opened the door, letting in a gust of snow. "Others," he said. "Men you wronged and forgot. Men who remember everything." A horn blew on the ridge. The Apaches rose. The rifle above the mantel shook slightly in its rack. Elias stared at the boy. No, not a boy now. A thread to a life unraveled. A story written in someone else's blood. "Wait," Elias said. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated. "Then Levi." Elias blinked. "That's not possible." Levi, if that was his name, looked over his shoulder. "Neither is Mercy." And he stepped into the snow. The cabin door swung shut behind him, creaking on old hinges as Elias stood alone. The wind screamed louder now, racing through the canyon like a thing unchained. Elias stood in the center of his cabin spine, rigid eyes locked on the rifle above the mantel. The air around him felt brittle, heavy with memory and the coming storm. Outside, the trees swayed under the weight of what was about to happen. 10 Apaches moved without speaking, tightening packs, checking crude weapons, drawing lines in the snow with their boots. Scarface offered Elias a blade carved from deer antler. Elias didn't take it. He reached instead for the rifle, the one he hadn't fired since the day he laid his son to rest. His fingers curled around the stock like they remembered the feel of war, of grief, of judgment. They came at dusk. First the riders. 6 torches high, faces covered with scarves to keep out the cold or hide the hate. Then the footmen, maybe 20. Farmers, ranch hands, the same men who used to nod at Elias in town. They stood just beyond the split-rail fence, weapons drawn, eyes full of certainty. In the center stood Dunn. Captain no more, but still wearing that blue coat like a badge. He raised his voice. "Bring them out, Kane. We don't want you, just them." Inside the cabin, Levi stared through the gap in the shutters, his jaw clenched. Elias stepped forward. The others tried to stop him. Scarface put a hand on his arm. Elias shook it off. He walked to the door, boots heavy on the floor, every breath a memory. He opened it wide. Snow swept in like judgment. I said Dunn began, but Elias cut him off. "They're not going anywhere," he said, voice steady. Dunn's smile didn't reach his eyes. So it's mutiny now. You choosing them over your own. Elias didn't answer. Just stepped onto the porch, rifle held low but ready. Dunn nodded to the man beside him, Russell, the same one who used to drink whiskey with Elias on Sundays. He raised his shotgun. Others followed. 20 guns now trained on one man. One barn. One flickering light behind old logs. You got till the count of 10, Dunn growled. Inside, Levi spoke quietly to the others. The woman kissed the doll's necklace and tied it to the stove handle. Scarface carved something into the table, quick, deep, final. Outside, Dunn started counting. 1. The cold bit deeper. Elias felt the sweat on his palms freeze. 2. The torchlight flickered on the snow, casting long shadows. 3. Somewhere to the left, a rifle clicked. 4. Elias looked at the land, the trees, the cabin, the crooked fence Levi once tripped over. 5. The fire behind him crackled. His heartbeat matched its rhythm. 6. He thought of the doll, the fever, the wrong grave, the right choice. 7. Levi stood behind him now, silent, still. 8. Elias raised the rifle. 9. The sky split with thunder, not from clouds but from fate. 10. A man can live his whole life running from sorrow and still find it waiting at his doorstep, wrapped in rags and frost-bitten feet. Elias Kane opened his door to 10 strangers and found not just their faces but his own sins staring back. Mercy in the West ain't soft. It's hard as dry earth, sharp as a knife, and often paid in blood. He could have shut the door, could have turned them in. But he didn't. Because sometimes doing right ain't about law or tribe, it's about ghosts you buried and the chance to unbury something human in yourself. When the line's drawn in the snow and both sides demand your soul, remember this: kindness might save a life. It might cost yours, but there's worse things than dying. Living without ever choosing to be more than just a man, that's the real death. Out here, mercy isn't weakness. It's the only strength worth having.